She only dialed 911 because she thought something looked wrong. But that single call set off a chain of events that no one, not even the police, saw coming. And what they uncovered turned a simple act of concern into a life-changing wake-up call. Before we uncover how one phone call spiraled into a full police investigation, take a second to subscribe. Here, we don't just tell stories. We share lessons that remind us how quickly life can turn and how awareness can protect us all. So settle in, hit that subscribe button, and let's walk through this unbelievable story together. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Cedar Falls, the kind where nothing ever really happens. The streets were calm, the coffee was hot, and everyone had their usual routines. But for Linda Matthews, that morning felt slightly off. Linda had lived on Oak Street for over 30 years. She knew every face, every car, every barking dog on the block. So when she noticed an unfamiliar van idling near her neighbor's driveway for almost half an hour, something inside her said, "That's not right." At first, she tried to brush it off. Maybe a delivery mix-up. Maybe a new maintenance crew. But when a man stepped out, glanced around nervously, and slipped behind her elderly neighbor's fence, Linda's heart started to pound. Her husband told her not to get involved. "Don't jump to conclusions, honey." But Linda remembered the safety meetings the local police held last year, the ones that warned about hesitation. If something doesn't feel right, the officer had said, you don't wait. You report. So, with a trembling hand, Linda made the call. 911, what's your emergency? I'm not sure it's an emergency, she said. But there's someone behind Mrs. Klein's house who doesn't belong there. The dispatcher's tone changed immediately. Ma'am, please stay on the line. Within minutes, police cars rolled down Oak Street, lights flashing, tires crunching against the gravel. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering. What happened next would shake Linda, her community, and even the local police department, because the truth behind that van was far from what anyone expected. And in the middle of it all, a small, human mistake would turn into a powerful lesson about awareness, trust, and the fine line between caution and assumption. The first cruiser stopped right in front of Mrs. Klein's home. Two officers stepped out, calm, professional, the kind of presence that makes a neighborhood feel both nervous and safe at the same time. Linda stayed by her window, her heart beating like a drum she couldn't quiet. She wasn't the kind of person who liked attention, but something about this felt serious now. Across the street, the van door slid open. The man, mid-30s, baseball cap pulled low, froze as the officers approached. One of them spoke, firm but polite. Sir, can we ask what you're doing here today? The man hesitated. Then came the words that made everyone watching lean in a little closer. I'm here to help. Mrs. Klein called me last week about fixing her back gate. The officers exchanged a quick look. One checked his clipboard, the other scanned the backyard. And sure enough, there was a box of tools and an open container of nails near the fence. Linda's face went pale. She felt her stomach twist, a wave of embarrassment mixed with relief. Had she overreacted? Had she caused trouble for an innocent man just doing his job? But then something else caught her eye. The officer's flashlight reflected off a strange marking on the van's license plate. The numbers didn't match what the dispatcher had pulled up. The vehicle wasn't registered to any business, and there was no permit for home repairs. The air shifted again. The easy tone vanished. One officer asked the man for identification. The other stepped quietly toward the back of the van. Inside were dozens of small boxes, some labeled with hardware brands, others blank. It didn't take long to realize they weren't all tools. Linda couldn't hear the rest from her window, but she could tell from the officer's expressions that this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. 10 minutes later, the man was in handcuffs and the van was being searched under a warrant. What the police found wasn't dangerous in the way anyone expected, but it was enough to teach everyone on Oak Street a lesson that would stay with them. That night, the police chief went door to door, explaining that the man had been running a string of unlicensed repair scams targeting older homeowners. He'd offer to fix small things, collect deposits, and disappear before the work was done. Mrs. Klein had nearly been his next target. Linda sat on her porch long after the cruisers left, thinking about how close things had come, and how her quick call, even if uncertain, had likely saved her neighbor from losing hundreds of dollars and her scenes of security. For days afterward, the community couldn't stop talking about it. Some praised Linda's instincts. Others wondered what might have happened if she'd hesitated or ignored her gut. But when the police chief later spoke at the town hall meeting, he said something that stayed with everyone in the room. One small act of awareness can prevent a big mistake, and sometimes even a crime. The next morning, Oak Street felt different. The van was gone, the flashing lights replaced by the quiet hum of sprinklers and morning birds, but the memory of what happened lingered in the air. Linda brewed her coffee slowly that day. Every sound outside made her pause. The mail truck, a car door, even the wind brushing through the oak trees. She wasn't frightened exactly, just aware. Later that afternoon, Officer Daniels, the same one who'd handled the call, stopped by to thank her. He wasn't there in uniform this time, just in a plain shirt, carrying a folder of pamphlets from the department. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, smiling kindly. "You did the right thing yesterday. I wanted you to know that." Linda tried to smile back. "I wasn't sure," she admitted. "For a minute, I thought I caused trouble for someone who didn't deserve it." Daniels shook his head. "That's the thing about safety. It's better to be cautious than silent. Your call helped us stop someone who's been taking advantage of good people across 3 counties." He handed her one of the pamphlets. On the front, it read, "Asterisk protecting our neighbors, recognizing the signs of a scam." Asterisk. Linda flipped it open. It listed simple, practical advice, things she wished she'd known sooner. Verify licenses. Ask for identification. Never pay cash up front. And most of all, trust your instincts. That night, she called Mrs. Klein, who was still shaken but grateful. They talked for over an hour, not just about what happened, but about how important it was to look out for one another, to keep an eye on the little things most people overlook. By the weekend, the police department invited Linda to share her experience at a community meeting. At first, she hesitated, but standing in front of her neighbors, she realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever doubted their gut feeling or stayed quiet out of fear of being wrong. She told them, a small mistake can lead to a big problem, but speaking up, even when you're unsure, can make all the difference. The room was silent for a moment, and then people started nodding, clapping softly. It wasn't applause for drama. It was respect, for courage, for awareness, for community. When Linda got home that evening, she looked out her window again, at the same street she'd known for 3 decades. For the first time, she didn't just see her neighborhood. She saw a network of people who, like her, had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pay attention. A week passed, and life on Oak Street slowly returned to normal. Kids rode bikes again, Mrs. Klein watered her roses, and the mailman stopped by with his usual wave. But something had changed, something you couldn't see, only feel. People talked more now. Neighbors checked on each other, shared updates, exchanged numbers. A sense of quiet watchfulness had replaced the old habit of minding one's own business. It wasn't about fear, it was about care. At the next community gathering, the police chief spoke again. He looked out over the crowd, mostly older residents who had lived in Cedar Falls for decades, and said, "Criminals often count on good people staying quiet. But every time someone like Linda speaks up, that silence breaks." The audience listened closely. Many of them had seen too much in their lifetimes, recessions, storms, scams, and loss. But they also knew the power of community. They understood that vigilance doesn't mean suspicion. It means awareness, compassion, and courage. Later that night, as Linda locked her front door, she caught her reflection in the glass. She wasn't just a retiree living on a quiet street anymore. She was part of a line of watchful eyes, ordinary people who refused to let small mistakes grow into tragedies. She turned off the porch light, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Not on our street. Not again." The camera would pull back here if this were a show. The glow of porch lights stretching down Oak Street, one by one, like stars returning after a dark night. And as the narrator's voice fades in, the message is clear. Sometimes, the biggest lessons come from the smallest moments. One person's awareness can protect an entire neighborhood. Because safety doesn't start with the police, it starts with us. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Oak Street spread quietly through the county. It wasn't front-page news, but it didn't have to be. People shared it over coffee, at church, at the grocery store checkout. Did you hear about that woman who trusted her instincts? They'd ask. And every time the story was told, the lesson grew stronger. The police department used it in their next neighborhood watch session. They even invited Linda again, not as a guest, but as a voice of experience. She stood beside Officer Daniels and said, "Awareness isn't fear. It's love in disguise, love for the people around you." The room was quiet. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. It wasn't drama. It was real life being honored. From that night on, every new resident who moved to Cedar Falls heard about the Oak Street call. It became a small legend, a reminder that doing the right thing doesn't always mean being sure. It just means caring enough to act. And as the screen slowly fades, the narrator's voice closes the story. In every town, on every quiet street, someone like Linda is watching out. Not to pry, but to protect. Because one small decision, one simple call, can make a world of difference. Stay alert, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of paying attention. Pause. Then the tone softens, calm, respectful, inviting. Thank you for watching today's story. If you believe in learning from real-life moments like this, stories that remind us we're all part of something bigger, go ahead and subscribe. Join our community of listeners who care, who think, and who act. Together, we'll keep turning ordinary mistakes into extraordinary lessons. 3 months passed. The air turned cooler. The trees around Oak Street dressed themselves in orange and gold, and life had quietly found its rhythm again. Linda still kept an eye on things, though not out of fear. It had become part of her morning ritual. Coffee in one hand, she'd glance out her window just long enough to be sure all was well. Most days it was until one morning, a familiar sound made her pause. The slow hum of an engine, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. A white van, almost identical to the one from that summer, rolled to a stop near the corner house. Her heart skipped. She wasn't jumping to conclusions, not after everything she'd learned. But this time, instead of calling right away, she did what the police workshop had taught. Observe first. She noted the license plate, the company name painted on the side, the worker's ID badge visible on his shirt. Everything checked out. Still, she decided to take a short walk, just to be sure. As she passed, the man looked up with a polite nod. "Morning, ma'am. Just here to install new alarm systems for the Johnsons." Linda smiled, but her mind was racing. Alarm systems? That was new. She later learned that after the Oak Street incident, several families had pooled money to upgrade neighborhood security. The same event that had shaken them months ago had also brought real change. When a job was done, the installer handed her a brochure. Community Watch approved, it read, "Because safety begins at your doorstep." That evening, Linda sat with her husband on the porch as the sun dipped low. "You see," he said softly, "that call you made, it started something." Linda nodded. "I guess one mistake really did lead to a big lesson." The cicadas hummed as the camera would pan slowly across the quiet neighborhood. Porch lights flicked on one by one again, not out of fear but unity. And then the narrator's voice returned, steady and thoughtful. Every community faces a moment that tests its awareness. For Oak Street, that moment came and passed, but the lesson stayed. Because safety isn't built overnight. It's built choice by choice, neighbor by neighbor. The scene fades with Linda placing the new safety brochure on her fridge, right beside a picture of her, Mrs. Klein smiling at the last town gathering. It was early November when the Cedar Falls Community Center filled up again. Folding chairs lined the room, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls drifting from the back table. Town hall nights were usually quiet affairs, budgets, road repairs, maybe a school update. But tonight felt different. Linda sat near the middle with Mrs. Klein beside her, listening as the police chief stepped up to the podium. He carried a thin folder under one arm, his expression steady but serious. 3 months ago, he began, a small mistake turned into one of the most important lessons this town has learned in years. Since then, calls to our non-emergency line have tripled. Not because people are afraid, but because they're aware. Polite applause rippled through the room. The chief smiled, then flipped open the folder. But awareness isn't just about watching. It's about understanding. And that's why we wanted you all here tonight. He held up a photo of a different van, silver instead of white. Last week, we stopped another unlicensed worker. This one was operating 2 towns over. And guess how we caught him? A resident recognized the same behavior Linda reported. A van parked too long in one spot. No business markings, no paperwork. That tip saved 3 families from losing thousands of dollars. A low murmur filled the hall. People turned toward Linda, some whispering, others nodding in quiet respect. She could feel her cheeks warm, but she stayed still, humbled. The chief continued. Mistakes happen. We all hesitate. We all second guess. But the real mistake is ignoring our instincts. One call can protect an entire neighborhood, not just from scams, but from the fear that follows them. He set the folder down and looked directly at the crowd. That's why starting next month, we're launching a program called Neighbors in Action. It'll train residents to recognize suspicious patterns, verify workers' credentials, and safely report concerns. Linda has agreed to help lead the first session. Gasps and applause filled the room. Mrs. Klein squeezed her hand. See? You started something good. Linda smiled, blinking back a tear. Maybe we all did. As the meeting wrapped up, people stayed behind to sign their names on the volunteer list. Conversations buzzed with plans and promises. Who would bring snacks? Who had a projector? Who could print flyers? When Linda stepped outside, the night air felt crisp and full of purpose. The same streetlights that once symbolized worry now glowed like beacons of hope. And the narrator's voice returned, calm and steady. Real safety isn't built by fear or by force. It's built by trust, shared knowledge, and the courage to act. Cedar Falls learned that one small mistake doesn't have to end in regret. It could begin a movement. The camera would rise slowly over the town square, the warm light spilling from the community center windows into the cold night. By December, the Neighbors in Action program was running smoothly. Every Tuesday night, residents gathered in the old library room to talk about safety, share updates, and learn simple ways to stay alert. Cedar Falls felt stronger than ever, united, informed, and confident. Then, one cold evening, a message arrived that unsettled everything. Officer Daniels stood at the back of the room while the group discussed holiday travel tips. His phone buzzed once, twice, then a third time. He checked the screen, frowned, and quietly stepped outside. A few minutes later, he came back in, his expression tight. Folks, he said, I don't want to cause panic, but we've just received reports of someone impersonating our department on phone calls. They're claiming to be collecting donations for community safety. It's a scam. The room fell silent. Mrs. Klein's hands trembled slightly. Linda felt that old tension return, the same one she'd felt the day she made the call months ago. Daniels continued, These people sound convincing. They use real officer names and badge numbers they find online. We're asking everyone to spread the word. The police never ask for money over the phone. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, replaying the chief's words from the town hall. Awareness isn't just about watching. It's about understanding. The next morning, she started making phone calls of her own. By noon, half the neighborhood knew about the scam. By evening, the local radio station aired a public service message written by Linda herself. Within 2 days, several towns had joined in. The scam was stopped before it spread further. The caller was traced to another state, and local police credited the quick response of the Cedar Falls residents. When the chief called Linda to thank her again, she laughed softly. Guess we're getting pretty good at learning from our mistakes, she said. He replied, That's how communities stay safe, one lesson at a time. January arrived with the kind of cold that made the air itself feel heavy. Snow blanketed Cedar Falls, and the sky stayed gray for days. Most folks stayed indoors, checking on neighbors by phone instead of walking next door. On the third night of the storm, the wind howled so loudly it drowned out the TV. Linda sat near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, when the power flickered twice and went out. The whole street went dark except for a few lanterns glowing faintly through windows. Her husband started toward the garage to set up their generator when a knock echoed through the front door. It wasn't a frantic knock, just slow and deliberate. Through the frosted glass, Linda could make out a figure wearing a parka and holding a small flashlight. "Evening, ma'am," came a muffled voice. "I'm of the power company. We're checking lines in the neighborhood. Mind if I take a look at your breaker box?" Something about the timing made her pause. In the safety meetings, they'd learned that legitimate utility workers carried visible IDs and usually came in pairs during storms. She couldn't see either. Keeping the door locked, she called out, "Can I see your identification, please?" The man shifted slightly. "Left it in the truck, but I can grab it." Before he could finish, a beam of light cut through the snow. Officer Daniel's cruiser turning onto the street. The stranger froze, then backed away toward the sidewalk. Daniel stepped out, calling over the wind, "Sir, stay where you are." Within seconds, another patrol car pulled in behind him. They spoke briefly with the man, who turned out not to be with the power company at all. He'd been moving door to door in nearby towns, claiming to inspect electrical systems and then demanding cash service fees. Linda exhaled slowly, her heart thudding. She hadn't panicked, hadn't overreacted, just followed what she'd learned. After the officers escorted the man away, Daniels tapped gently on her window. "You did exactly right, Mrs. Matthews. That's how awareness works. Calm, careful, and smart." By morning, the storm had passed, and sunlight glimmered off the snow-covered rooftops. News spread quickly about the imposter caught on Oak Street. Neighbors called Linda again, some to thank her, others just to say they felt safer knowing she was looking out for them. That evening, as she watched the sunset paint the snow in gold, Linda whispered to herself, "One more lesson learned." And the narrator's voice returned softly. When storms come, whether made of wind, deceit, or doubt, it's not fear that protects a community. It's preparation and the strength to ask questions before opening the door. The camera would pan slowly across the frozen houses, the lights flickering back on one by one, until Oak Street glowed warm again. By early spring, the snow had melted, revealing tidy lawns and the first hints of daffodils along Oak Street. The town felt alive again. Kids walking to school, neighbors sweeping porches, the kind of peace that only small towns know after a hard winter. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in Linda's mailbox stamped with the town seal. She opened it carefully. Inside was a formal invitation. Asterisk, the Cedar Falls Community Service Committee cordially invites you to our annual awards luncheon. You have been selected as this year's Community Guardian honoree. Asterisk. She blinked at the words, not quite believing them. Her husband grinned. "Looks like your instincts earned you more than a thank you this time." A week later, the community hall buzzed with conversation and the smell of fresh coffee. Folding tables were lined with homemade pies and casseroles. People from every corner of town came. Police officers, teachers, shop owners, retirees who'd lived there their whole lives. When Linda's name was called, she walked to the podium, her hands trembling just a little. The chief handed her a small plaque carved with oak leaves. "For courage, compassion, and community leadership," it read. She looked out over the crowd, familiar faces, warm smiles, and said, "I never set out to be brave. I just did what I thought was right. But what I've learned is that courage doesn't always mean charging into danger. Sometimes it's just paying attention and caring enough to act." Applause filled the room, steady and heartfelt. Mrs. Klein wiped away a tear. Officer Daniels nodded from the back, proud but quiet. Later that evening, as Linda left the hall, she paused to watch the sunset over the water tower. The plaque felt heavy in her hands, but in a good way, the kind of weight that reminded her that one small action could ripple far beyond her front porch. At home, she placed the award next to the same police pamphlet she'd received months ago. The words on the cover still rang true. Protecting our neighbors, recognizing the signs of a scam. The narrator's voice would fade in, low and reflective. Sometimes heroes don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they're neighbors with coffee cups in hand, willing to look out the window one more time before turning away. In towns like Cedar Falls, that's what keeps everyone safe. The camera would rise slowly, showing the quiet grid of streets bathed in golden light. A year had passed since the Oak Street incident, and Cedar Falls had changed, not in looks, but in spirit. There is a quiet confidence in the town now, the kind that comes from people who know they can rely on one another. At the elementary school, a group of fifth graders had started a project called Safe Steps. They'd heard about Linda's story during a community assembly and wanted to create posters reminding residents to verify visitors and share information safely. The walls of the town hall soon filled with hand-drawn signs. Check before you open, neighbors keep neighbors safe, and trust your gut. It's usually right. One morning, the school principal called Linda. The kids would love for you to come speak at their assembly, she said. Linda hesitated. Public speaking wasn't exactly her comfort zone, but something inside her said yes. When she stood in front of the students a week later, she didn't bring notes or a speech, just the same calm sincerity that had guided her through everything. You know, she began, grown-ups don't always have all the answers. But when something doesn't feel right, that's your mind trying to protect you. Listening to that feeling, that's called awareness. And awareness keeps us safe. The kids listened closely. A boy in the front row raised his hand. Did you get scared when you called the police? Linda smiled. Yes, I did. But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are. When the assembly ended, the children crowded around to thank her, asking questions and sharing their own little stories. A lost bike, a stranger at the door, a neighbor who helped when something fell off. Linda realized that what started with one phone call had now become a living lesson being passed on, story by story, generation to generation. That afternoon, Officer Daniels stopped by the school. He shook Linda's hand. You might not realize it, but this is how real change happens, he said. It's not about big events. It's about small reminders that keep the next generation alert and kind. As Linda walked home, she passed the park where the new community safety board stood. On it were photos from the town hall meetings, flyers about workshops, and one quote printed in bold letters beneath her picture. Awareness isn't fear, it's love in disguise. She stopped to read it again, smiling softly. Cedar Falls wasn't just safer now, it was wiser. And the narrator's voice came in one last time for the episode's close. Good habits start with one choice, but they live on through teaching. In every story like Linda's, the lesson isn't just about catching danger. It's about creating a culture where care and caution walk hand in hand. The camera would slowly pan upward, showing the schoolyard, the laughter of children echoing against the warm afternoon sky. The next generation of protectors already learning what it means to look out for one another. Years rolled by, and Cedar Falls continued to thrive. The town grew a little, new families moved in, and the faces of the community meetings slowly changed. But one thing stayed the same, the story that started it all. Every year, on the anniversary of the Oak Street incident, the town held a small gathering at the community center. They called it Awareness Day. It wasn't a big event. No fancy speeches or parades. Just people sharing stories, safety tips, and reminders to look out for one another. Linda, now a little older and moving slower, still attended every year. She didn't sit up front anymore. She liked the back row, where she could see everyone, parents teaching their kids, officers shaking hands with residents, and neighbors laughing like old friends. One year, as she was leaving, a young woman approached her. You don't know me, she said, smiling, but my grandmother used to live here. She told me about what you did. Because of your story, I always double-check who's at my door. I even started a safety group in my own neighborhood. Linda's eyes softened. That's wonderful, dear. Keep it going. It matters more than you think. That night, she walked home under the same oak trees that had shaded her for decades. The houses looked peaceful, porch lights glowing, curtains drawn, families safe inside. She thought about how it all began. One phone call, one uncertain moment, one small mistake that became a lesson for hundreds. As she stepped on her porch, she looked back at the street and whispered, "We did it right." The narrator's voice came in one last time, calm and full of warmth. Sometimes, the most powerful stories don't end with headlines or handcuffs. They end with safer homes, wiser neighbors, and a stronger sense of trust. Cedar Falls didn't just survive a mistake. It turned it into a guide for others to follow. The camera would slowly pull away, Oak Street glowing in the quiet night, lights shining like beacons of community and care. Then the outro begins, gentle music, steady and sincere. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own neighborhood, take a moment to subscribe. Here, we share stories that don't just entertain, they teach, they comfort, and they remind us that awareness and kindness still matter. Your support helps us keep these lessons alive for our families, our friends, and the next generation watching from the sidelines. So stay with us. There's always another story to tell, another lesson to learn, and another reminder that doing the right thing never grows old. The screen fades to black. The channel logo appears softly, not flashing, just steady, with the final words. Stay aware, stay kind, stay safe,